morning and hello from Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is Arvind Lodaya. I'm originally from Bangalore, India, and I'm going to make a case for opening up our gated community. The trigger and motivation behind this thought balloon was the glaring difference of status between trained and untrained design practitioners vis-a-vis untrained or unqualified artisans, or as I like to call them, craftists. The image on the screen is one of one such worker at the National Institute of Design, NID, who recently passed away. And this is taken from the social media tributes that were paid to him by many of the students who learned from him. It was when teaching design to people like this, who lacked the privilege of Western influence or exposure, that I had my epiphanic moment, that the training that I was imparting was mostly about Western cultural and techno-economic values, rather than any intrinsic or agnostic technical parameters about design. It struck me then that design education was or is, by and large, a massive acculturation project, along with its shadow, deculturation. The origins of this can be traced at the founding of institutional design, as for example, the India report out here, of which you can see a few pages, written by the great American designer couple, Charles and Ray Eames. They wrote this for the founding of institutional design in India, way back in 1957-58. It's a beautifully worded and visionary document in case you haven't read it. In it, even as the authors eulogize the genius of craft through their tribute to the lota, which is the Indian water pot, in the same stroke, they relegate India's traditional design to the past. Tradition gets framed through a Western anthropological historical lens and gets rendered as primitive and exotic, even though it was very much alive, thriving, and commonplace in the present. So reflecting on the binary of modern and tradition, let us recall the great Eric Hobsbawm, who showed how traditions have no real relation with the past. In fact, they have been invented even in modern times for political reasons and also commercial. Sadly, this binary manifested into a binary between design and craft, or traditional design if you want to call it that way, reducing craft to an object of nostalgia and a subject for modernization, which is where designers like me came in as trainers, and dare I say design intervention, with the unfortunate consequence of rendering traditional and indigenous design knowledge almost entirely invisible. If you look at design epistemology, Nigel Cross pinpoints the locus of the expert knowledge of designers as the human-made world of artifacts, and particularly stresses on innovation and originality, as I'm sure most of us would agree. But this seemingly posits traditional handicraft as antithetical to design, since, as the Eames described it, and as the popular understanding goes, it is a bunch of unconscious, pre-programmed, preset practices that preserve the status quo. In other words, it has little to do with innovation and originality. Let us therefore compare the design process with that of craft. On closer look, we actually find that traditional design also follows a process and iterates its products every year or periodically, quite like automobile models, but in subtle ways. Why subtle? You see, its market need is for continuity rather than novelty. But with every iteration, it also undergoes or undertakes analysis, improvement, innovation, and optimization, while maintaining the overall gestalt, because that's what its market demands. The image on the bottom left shows an Indian tribal artist's representation of the London Underground system in his distinctive formal style. Now, without this explanation, we would have interpreted it as some primitive folklore or mythological mumbo-jumbo. Moving from process to outcome, what is it really that distinguishes design artifacts from traditional design ones? It may be argued that the difference is substantially stylistic and contextual, both of which are arbitrary and variable factors that really do not define the discipline. So much of it, as you can see, as at least I understand it or I see it, is about symbolism and tradition or context. Now, moving to disciplinary knowledge, Cross and more recently Wood and others do mention tacitness in designerly knowledge, but they limit it to the skill aspect. So whose failure is it if tacit or oral knowledge does not get explicated formally? Certainly not of the traditional designers. It's a good time also to recall Polanyi's immortal quote here, which expresses to me the limitation of language in itself or articulation in itself. And therefore, the question that comes up is which formal language can claim to thoroughly capture every aspect of design knowledge? Isn't much of it also tacit, embodied, and defying verbalization? In design reviews, which we may have been part of, we often check verbalization in favor of letting the artifact speak. It is no different with craft. And as anybody who has worked with or interacted with a great craftist would know, that applies to design knowledge or traditional design knowledge as well. Balaram writes that artisans are storehouses of knowledge that constitute a wealth of learning. He cites a popular aphorism that in oral cultures, when an artisan dies, 100 libraries are burnt down. To conclude, I refer to the effort to place design in the league of science, which thankfully seems to have retreated of late. As recently as 2016, Jones and others concluded that there is so far no independent epistemic basis to establish design as a recognizably independent discipline. Now, this may sound really disheartening or devastating for us, but in fact, we are witnessing, as we know through practice, what one may call a turn towards humanness or humanities in design, with words like emotion and empathy coming into play. It does appear that, referring to the great Herbert Simon, we will learn more about the science of artificiality the more we embrace our humanness. This opens up a historic opportunity, in my view, to draw in various design cultures to join the mainstream and enrich the discourse. Recalling Mahatma Gandhi, who said find purpose, means will follow, can we merely agree on the core values of design, something like intent, quality, outcome, and open up everything else? So what could that look like? And here are some of the gates that I talk about that we can open up or must open up in order to allow plurality and diversity to rush in and occupy design. Materials and production processes, temporality, which is the kind of periods, so to speak, or post-war kind of economy in which the design was founded, supposedly, and speed of process, which is no longer about acceleration and rapidness, vocabulary and method, even the language, which is overshadowed by a specific language or a specific cultural aspect of language, and methodology, and last but not the least, culture and aesthetic, which is what the acculturation project ends up being. Can you imagine the incredible diversity and so variety that we'd suddenly be enveloped around? My intuition is that it would still share a common and inspiring core of wholesomeness, sublimeness, and exquisiteness if we remain uncompromising on those few core elements like intent, quality, outcome. Of course, to be appreciated in context. I am confident that doing this would actually boost many of the emerging areas of interest and relevance for design, such as slow design, circular design, local design, design for the commons, spiritual design, design and storytelling, and of course, indigenous design. Thank you for your patience and attention. I would love your feedback and even more, opportunities to put these exciting ideas into practice. Have a good rest of the day.